I'm Chad.
And I'm Cheese, and we are the Chad and Cheese Podcast.
Our podcast covers
news, startups, AI, automation, programmatic, and all the things the kids are excited about.
and then we drown it with a healthy dose of snark, attitude, and four-letter words.
Subscribe to the Chad and Cheese Podcast today, wherever you listen to your podcasts.
Hey everybody, welcome to TalentCast. James Ellis here. So we're going to talk about D&I, which, as many of you know, I'm a big fan of. I'm very interested in it, but I don't feel like I am particularly, let's say, qualified in this subject, right? I know what I look like, I know what I sound like, I know who I am, and it's not my space to say. I don't feel like I can tell what the answers are. I don't know that I have good solutions or examples. I'm just me. So I love talking to people who are really good at this, who have great perspectives, who have lots of things to say. And we're going to be joined by Madison Butler in just a minute. So she's got a lot of stuff to talk about. We're going to talk about specifically what does the intersection look like between employer brand and D&I. We'll be right back. Welcome to the TalentCast, the world's most caffeinated employer brand podcast. I'm your host, James Ellis. And I've been doing employer brand for years now, and I absolutely love the industry. I love how it's growing. I love how it's changing. And I've tried to do my part to elevate the concept, to get everybody to understand the power employer brand can have in hiring, attracting, and retaining talent. So we try to really focus on driving home the idea that this is a calling and a craft. It's a lot of getting your hands dirty, but it's also a lot of big strategic thinking. And that's where we kind of live, that kind of Venn diagram, the intersection between those, the big ideas, and the getting the details right. So we talk a lot about employer brand and how to do it right and how to think about it and how to look at your problems in a whole new way. Ready to rock? 1, 2, 3, let's go. All right, James Ellis recording live from Chicago and apparently Austin, which was where I went to school about a bajillion years ago. And with me is Madison Butler. Madison is the VP of People and Culture over at Sourced Craft Cocktails, a startup out of Austin. She's not been there too long, but she's a startup monster. She's a startup creature. So Madison, thank you so much for being here. We've known each other for a while on LinkedIn. We got a chance to meet each other a couple months ago when I was talking in Austin. So I'm so glad we can make some time to kind of chat.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good. How you doing?
I'm good,
Yeah.
I'm in my house.
Yeah. Really? Really? Weird.
Yeah, I know.
You're the only one. You're the only person who's that's happening to. I did a webinar. I just finished a webinar and someone says, "Yes, I'm in my basement." I'm like, that just sounds depressing. That's rough. It's like, this is a tough enough situation. Don't go in your basement.
I miss having a basement. That is like my number one miss from the East Coast is having a basement.
But but when it was like a game room or a rumpus room, right? Not like a dreary, dank basement.
I think it's just more so because like now I just have to store everything in my garage.
That's fair.
Because I don't have a basement.
Welcome to the TalentCast, where we talk storage situations. So let's just jump right into it. So I don't have a good question. Here's my kind of kickoff, and that is, I'm a big believer that somehow, if I squint real hard, I can see a connection between employer brand and D&I. I just don't know how to spell that connection out. I know that a lot of times, employer branders talk about the power of D&I, but I feel like we talk about it in a very topsoil, facile kind of level that we don't have a level of depth to it a lot of times. So you are someone who is deeply passionate. You are incredibly vocal on LinkedIn about the subject. You have a lot of great stuff to say. Let's just start there. First off, how do you talk about D&I? How do you see D&I? And then we'll get into how does it connect to employer brand?
Yeah, so I guess the way I see D&I, like if I actually had to visualize it, I think of it the way almost a food pyramid looks. Okay. And so I think a lot of times we get really caught up in talking about race and gender and, who you love. And like those are what I would consider like those pillars, like the building blocks, like those are definitely the most marginalized because they're the most visible or the most talked about. But when you actually think about D&I, it's really more intersectional than that. And there's all these different pieces that play in, whether you're a parent or you're a non-parent or you're a caretaker, there's all this just like stuff that falls into D&I. And I think that's, the really important way to look at it. Otherwise you lose people's interest because when you're talking to a man who is maybe white and straight and I,
hi, how you
talk
doing?
about D&I. Yeah. Oh my God, hi.
Good to meet you at last.
I want them to feel like this is a topic that also affects them in some way. And sometimes I think people shut down when they're like, well, I'm not Black, I'm not a woman, I'm not gay.
Yep.
And I'm like all those things. So sometimes people think, it's just that. And I think the biggest thing about D&I is being able to care about topics that don't affect you, but knowing that somewhere in there it does also affect you and how you will function in your workplace.
Yeah. So let's unpack the concept of intersectionality. Let me speak clearly a little bit. I feel like it's a word that's thrown around, and a lot of times it's not either defined or everybody has a different sense of it. So what do you mean by intersectionality?
Yeah. So the way, again, it's about having more than one lens when you view D&I, which means I'm not just viewing it as a Black woman, and I'm not just viewing it as a queer woman, or, a woman who is a veteran, or one who's disabled. And so you can be all of those things, and that's kind of where your intersections meet.
I see.
Obviously, the more marginalized you are, the more likely you are to be discriminated against. And so you could be a woman, but as a Black woman, you'll always be more discriminated against than a white woman.
Just more reasons to discriminate against you, I guess, right?
Yeah, it's like more. The more there
factors.
is, the more. Yep, 100%.
Okay.
And so when we think about, or the way I like to think about kind of building culture and building inclusivity in the workplace is like, if I can make a culture that works for someone who is the most marginalized, like the stress case, then it'll work for the test case. So it'll work for a woman who is just, me, like a Black woman.
Yep.
If it works for a woman who is Black, gay, disabled, and a veteran, like if it works for them, it's going to work for me.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the way I view it, if that makes sense.
So how come more companies don't see it that way, where they focus on the most marginalized or the hardest stress case, so to speak? I like the way you're phrasing that. So why don't most companies say, okay, how do we treat a gay, disabled, veteran, Black woman, or trans woman, whatever, throw it in there, go all out. How come they don't start with that? How come they don't say, well, if we understand how it works for that kind of person, we have a better sense of how it works for people who aren't that?
Because it's hard. I think the more marginalized you get and the more into it you get, you have to start examining the own biases you have within yourself. Because at some point, something is going to bubble up inside of you that you have feelings about, and like you've got to address that.
Yeah.
So the less you talk about, the less you have to talk about, the less you have to examine. And so, perfect example, I have a friend who recently applied for a role here in Austin with a startup company, and she had an interview, and one of her questions was, well, how do y'all look at D&I? And they said, oh, well, we don't, because we think we're good, and if you talk about it, then you have a problem. So if you're talking about it, then you have a problem. And she was like, ooh, that's really scary.
Yeah.
And so some people just don't want to talk about it. They would much rather continuously hire for that whole culture fit thing, which means I'm just going to hire like the same person over and over and over, and they're going to be 25, wear boat shoes, and have been in a fraternity.
Yeah. No, it's funny because employer brand, a lot of that was, some of the thinking was, well, if you need to invest in your employer brand, it means your company's having problems. And now we've gotten to the point where every company needs to invest in employer brand just to understand and maintain it and manage it, to shape it over the course of time. So that's an interesting kind of parallel there. So let's talk about culture fit, because I think that's another loaded term. And I'm going to guess you and I, we're going to hit all these sorts of kind of minefields as we have this conversation. Step, kaboom. So culture fit versus culture add, or is there another kind of way to look at this, where to avoid the sense of how do I avoid functionally cloning myself or cloning my hiring managers so that there are more points of view? And then how do you talk about the idea of why? Or is that just such an obvious, stupid question that we shouldn't even get into that?
I think you would be surprised at how many people get so angry when I say that culture fit is like not a good thing.
Yeah.
And one, I think it's because we're really caught up in this mindset of we have to like everyone we hire. And we want to go get a beer with everyone we hire, and that's just not realistic. If I want to get a beer with every single person I hire, it means I've hired people who would like fall into my friend circle, which means they're probably pretty damn similar to myself, whether it be from a value standpoint or from their background, whatever. They're relating to me really heavily, and I think that we have to kind of break that stigma of we should want to be friends with everyone we hire, because that's just not the case. It's really hard to get different viewpoints when you just really like everyone. And don't get me wrong, I think everyone should be able to get along, and that's like part of being an adult is you like learn to function with different points of view.
Yeah, civility is not the same as friendship.
Correct. And so I think when we're thinking about hiring people, like I'm not asking myself like, oh, like, do I want to go hang out with them? I'm asking myself, are they a good person? What values do they add to my organization, to my team, to a project? Are they not hoarding tigers in their backyard? Like, those are the things I care about.
What's the problem with hoarding tigers in your backyard? Oh,
I mean, didn't really go so well. And so I think we get really caught up in this, like, oh, well, like if I don't want to go to happy hour with them, because I know I used to work in an organization where they would do the couch test, which was like, well, do I want to like have a conversation with this person outside of work? And like, you don't need to. It's work.
Yeah. Well, I mean, honestly, I would be a weird case because all I like to do is talk about work because that's just because I'm a total nerd for it. And I get the sense that you're not too far off that either. But, you know, I would love to talk to people who I'm like, I'm not going to invite you to a wedding. I'm not going to, you know, hang out with you with a beer. But if you want to talk about, let's strategize, let's talk through a work problem. That sounds like a lot of fun. And I do want to hear different opinions. And I do want to hear people who aren't me at all, because frankly, I get enough of me in me. My head will not shut up. I do not need more of that.
Exactly. And so I think it is really hard to solve complex problems when you only have one think tank.
Yeah.
And so you end up just solving problems the exact same way all of the time, and that doesn't actually foster growth.
Yeah.
And so I think you have to have difference of opinion sometimes, and you have to have different worlds. Like people have to come from different worlds sometimes, and I think that's a good thing. And culture fit really loses that, because then you end up with a company that is just literally full of people between the ages of 26 and 28, and that's it.
Yeah. And I think that the argument against that has always been, well, if everybody is in the same kind of culture fit, we move more optimally, we move more efficiently, we move in the right direction. But that ignores the idea, or it assumes the idea that you just have to find the answer fast, not that you have to find a better answer. Because I think we're at the stage now where all the easy problems have been solved. So it's only complicated, messy, ugly, sweaty, just a messy problem to solve. And that's all that's left. And consequently, getting there faster doesn't mean you're getting there better. We should be focused on, let's kick this idea around with as many people as possible to make sure we're not missing an opportunity to serve an audience, to engage in a different point of view, to understand how other people see it than we do.
Definitely. And I think that's something that's really lost in the world right now. It's like everything needs to be done fast rather than done well.
Yeah. That's interesting. Okay.
And I think it's definitely a problem, like in being, in the startup life cycle, is a lot of startups move at lightning speed, and then you like hit a wall.
Yeah. Beyond that, they define themselves by that lightning speed. I've worked at a company that was 6,000 people that like to pretend that they were a startup because they still thought they were fast. And you're like, you went public 8 years ago. How are you a startup exactly? What defines a startup versus a non-startup? Yeah, it's because we still hire people in dinosaur outfits to walk around the office because it's funny. That's what startups do. Like, no.
And that's the other thing, is like when people think about culture fit, like they're not actually thinking about what would define a culture. They're like, well, this person like having a keg. Do they drink kombucha? Are they going to play foosball with me? And, I'm constantly talking about like, those are not like benefits. That's like a weird hill to die on, to be like, well, you should come work here because there's kombucha, when like if you paid me enough, I could buy my own fancy kombucha.
Yeah. Though honestly, I did an audit for a company once that I swear if I had to write their employer brand based on what they were putting out in the world, I would say their employer brand is, we're a startup, we have cold brew. And that you wouldn't even get into what they do or how they do it or why they do it, because all their messages are, we're a startup and we have cold brew. Like they said it over and over again, as if that was some sort of differentiating factor.
Well, and I had someone who I interviewed, and one of my questions was like, well, what about us makes you want to be here? And they were like, well, I really like the brand of cold brew you have. And I was like, you can buy it.
Yeah. It's not special.
We didn't make it.
You're not out there picking the beans special just for your own particular brand. Yikes. Yeah. Okay. So that helps me kind of, and let's kind of just shake that one more time, because as you intimated, I am a straight white male. I'm a breeder, right? I am the classic, I am, supposed to be the standard, which is crazy because I'm absolutely that minority once you include all the different people. I might be if you're lucky, a plurality. I might have the biggest audience group to talk to or to be represented by, but in no way am I the majority. I haven't been the majority in a very, very long time. But I have no idea how to engage with some conversations certain times. I was giving a webinar 2 years ago. And I apologize, it's going to be a bit of a story, so here you go. So I had always been told, hey, what do I know? TV tells you to do things, you do things. Hey, people of color like to refer to as African American. Great, fine, cool. I show up to this company, they have an ERG called Blacks at Company, and I went, oh, they want to be called Black. That's fine. I don't care. It's not you tell me. I'll do whatever you tell me to do. You want to be called whatever it is? Great, I'm going to call you that. I was on a webinar and said, so if you want to engage with Blacks, and somebody went on the chat function in the webinar and just beat me up. That's incredibly offensive. How dare you? And I'm like, what? How? And it completely threw me off, and it completely threw the webinar off. So how do we have conversations? How do we say, I want to be an ally. I want to be part of this. I want to be more the solution than the problem. I want to support people who are not me because I think everybody should have that fair shot and everybody should be represented and everybody should be served. How do we have conversations when the playing field is a minefield? How do we start those conversations?
I think there's two sides to the coin. One side is just not being scared of messing up. Okay. I think a lot of people don't come out and talk about D&I because they're so scared of messing up. They may say the wrong thing. They may use the wrong pronoun. They may say Black instead of African American. Because there's just a lot of different words that come up all of the time. I was recently on a panel here, and it was originally called the BIPOC panel. And literally everyone on the panel was like, none of us use this term.
Yeah, I've never even heard of it.
Exactly. And so there's always evolving terminology. Mm-hmm. And on the flip side of this, I think there's a very intense lesson of not villainizing people who are trying and still fumbling. I really think that there will be times where people do say the wrong pronoun. And I think the only time that saying the wrong pronoun is something to villainize is when they were hey, my preferred pronouns are she, her, and that person says, well, I'm not going to call you that. Yeah. I'm going to call you this.
Well, that's called being a dick.
Yeah, exactly. And so, I have people on my LinkedIn who say it all the time, well, I don't believe in people's pronouns. And, for me, I'm an atheist. I don't believe in Christianity, but I'm not going to tell you you're not a Christian. It is literally that simple. You just let whatever someone believes they are, you believe that for them too. I'm not saying you have to believe it for yourself or anyone else, but whatever they are, you just accept that. And that's as easy as it is. Kids get it so well, and adults are just it blows their mind.
Yeah, because it breaks their perceived understanding of how the world should work, not how it does work, and that gets really complicated. That gets really messy in a hurry.
100%. And and it's not even just around topics that are this. It's for me, I am child free. And I remember I had someone at a company that I was at that was what is your partner doing today? I was oh, he's cleaning the kitchen. They were isn't that your job? And I was no. I was this is actually my job. I'm here. I get paid. We both do chores. And later on, we were at a happy hour, and her husband said to my partner, I can't believe you handle her. She doesn't even want to have kids. And I was
goodness.
oh my God, I'm not a zoo animal. What do you mean? And it's just because my life is so opposite of theirs. We don't have kids. We just have a ton of dogs, and he does laundry, and people just it blows their mind when people just live differently. Yeah. And I think if we could all just kind of, and again, back to culture fit, we don't have to fit into a box, just allowing humans to take whatever their space is and being oh, cool, that's how you live. Awesome. Sweet. High five.
That's interesting. Yes, exactly. Okay. So let me ask, let me kick one more kind of, let's call it a use case at you, because I'd love to hear your opinions, because I'm on the fence on this myself. So this is a personal struggle I have. So unless you're legitimately an alien from another galaxy, if you see a picture of me, I'm pretty sure 99.9999999% of people would say, that's a dude. So I see lots of people who put their pronouns in their email signatures. You have them in your LinkedIn profile. What is the value? What is the purpose? I'd love your opinion, should I say he, him at the end of that stuff? Is there value in that? Is it, it seems such a complicated idea. Obviously, since I since I know I'm a dude, and I think everybody in the world looks at me and goes, yeah, that's a dude, I shouldn't need to, but maybe I'm missing something. So let's talk about that for a second, because I think it's a good chance to kind of unpack a piece of this.
Yeah, I get asked that a lot, and that's almost the point. And so obviously, I self-represent as a woman. So my pronouns are she, her. Mm-hmm. And I don't have my pronouns on there for me. You can pretty much look at me, hear me, know off the bat that I present as a woman. However, there are going to be people who don't present that way because they're non-binary, sure. They're androgynous, whatever. And so for me, I want people to always know that I am going to be a safe space to tell me their pronouns, and I'm going to say them right back. And I want people to have the conversation with me about my pronouns so that I can explain it to them, because it's not a sensitive subject for me. It is not so pertinent in my life that I will be extremely hurt by the person on the other end of the line. And so I want to make sure, again, that like being an advocate for D&I is not just about me being a Black woman. It is about every single person. And like, this fight is not over until it doesn't affect trans women. It doesn't affect Black women. It doesn't affect gay men. Like, I can't just be in this fight for myself, because that doesn't solve the problem. And so I really look at it like, until I can see everyone at the table, it doesn't matter if I've made it to the table. I have to be an advocate for anyone who's not there too.
So it's a signal you're putting forth to the world saying, if you are wondering where my feeling or perception of gender questions or D&I is, this is my signal that, hey, I'm cool with whatever. I'm open to whatever. Let's have the conversation more than anything else. Would that be a fair assessment?
Definitely. And so I think sometimes it is easier and it feels less pointed to have that conversation with someone like me versus like you saying it to someone who maybe is trans. It is a harder conversation, I think, sometimes for them to have when they don't know what your response is going to be. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. That's helpful. I appreciate that. So let's turn the car a little bit over to employer brand. So I'm going to start by defining how I perceive employer brand, just because I think if we don't, we're going to be talking past each other, and that's unfortunate for both of us and for anybody who has to listen to this. So I talk about employer brand. I think about employer brand as the aggregate understanding of what people think it's like to work at a company based on interactions and experiences. So if person A talks to their cable company, their insurance company, their cell phone provider, and hates the customer service they get, they presume that working at those places is not going to be a fun place to work based on that experience. And it's an individual perception, meaning I think working at company X is going to be amazing. You might look at it and go, yeah, that place looks like a hellhole. I don't know. You'd have to pay me 3 times as much as I make now to even consider applying. And they're both valid opinions. They are both the employer brand. It's an aggregate of all those ideas. So if that being the case, or at least that being kind of a starting point, how does D&I factor into that? How do we say for individuals, how are they inputting the D&I conversation and inputting their experiences as someone who might be marginalized into that perception of the brand?
So I will say, I think 100% as a person of color, the first thing I do when looking at another company is trying to figure out how many other people look like me, and then maybe seeing if I can connect with someone and like, so because the world may be great for you as a white man there, but like, what is it like for you as a Black woman? Yeah. And so I think a lot of times when, you see the comparison, it is extremely different, especially here in like startup land. And so I do think that there is, I don't know necessarily, it is like a weird connection, but it is there because I know, like, for me, that's like one of the first things I want to know about is like, what does your representation look like and what do their experiences look like? Yeah. Like their actual experiences, not what's painted, on your D&I website.
But so, but there's a great word. As my therapist's ex-wife used to say, that stands for behold the underlying truth. That's not the case here. I remember when University of Wisconsin at Madison photoshopped in the second Black person onto their brochure, who unfortunately was the exact same as the first person, and thought no one would notice. And they were, trying to feed into the sense of, look, it's okay to be Black, and we're totally cool with Black people in this university that was generally pretty lily white. So how do you avoid, let me rephrase that. How do I avoid, if I'm owning a brand, any semblance of tokenism in that regard? If I know that someone like you is coming in just doing a first initial pass at, do people who look like me work here? How do I avoid tokenism?
I think it's more like your employer brand in this sense needs to be incredibly authentic and real. Because if you have all of these pictures of people of color, of women on your website or on your brochure, but I walk in for my first interview, let me tell you, the first thing I'm doing is taking like a good hard look around to be like, where are those people sitting?
Yeah. Where are they sitting? That's really interesting. I went straight to, do I see them at all? Do they exist, or are they bullshit?
Well, so
that's interesting.
I always do the where are they sitting, because here's the thing about D&I that is often incredibly missed. You could have people of color, but if they are all on the teams that are making the least amount of money,
HR.
How much good are you doing? Like customer service, being on the phones, my biggest thing is I'm going to look at your leadership team.
Yeah.
Do they all look the same?
Yeah.
Because that's, for me, at least for me, that's
no, completely valid. That's what Tom Peters used to talk about. He would say, look, if you took all the five, and this was 20 years ago, but I think it still rings true. If you took the boards and C-suites of every Fortune 1000 company, you're going to notice that the people they hire who are black end up in the HR team. They are the CHRO of most companies. That's where they kind of check a box, because that's all they're trying to do. They're not really trying to say, how do we open leadership up to alternate points of view?
Exactly, because then it messes with the board too much. The board gets all wild.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So, okay, so I like that as a starting point. So let me ask a harder question. If my company and me and all the people in it legitimately want to be open to that, but as a startup of 7 people, we all happen to look a lot like me, how do you bring in the first person of color? How do you bring in the first woman? How do you bring in the first whatever to start to open those doors? To me, that's the toughest part, because once you get one, okay, there's at least a head nod to say, look, we are actively trying to fix this or change this or open the doors to stuff, but how do you get the first one?
Yeah, and I actually think being the number one is the hardest spot, because it's really weird to be an only.
Oh, yeah.
And so I think part of it is having, again, really authentic conversations where I'm like, hey, this is how we feel. And it's not that we're bringing you in to be the token, whatever. However, we're looking to change, the way we look. We're trying to change our footprint, and we have to start somewhere. But I think you have to have that awkward conversation, as awkward as it may be, rather than just bringing them in and then being like, oh, look it, I'm the token black girl now.
Yeah,
Yay.
yeah.
Stock photo brown girl. I don't want to be your stock photo brown girl, but I do want to know that if I'm coming into a company as a first, that you are open to me helping you be thought leaders in this space. So really valuing this person's input and not just hiring them to be that quiet stock photo. Too often, people of color are hired to be a quiet stock photo, and people love diversity until diversity is loud.
Yeah.
And so I think you have to be open to them actually having a voice and speaking up and being like, hey, John, what you just said, that was wild and kind of racist. And you may not know that, but can I call that out for you so we can maybe self-examine? And so I think people get scared of having those conversations. And so when people do start to stir the pot a little, which I have no experience with at all,
not you. No.
People get really, 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 really uncomfortable.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Because, it's one thing to say, I'm judging your work, I'm judging what you've done, versus I'm judging you. And we've, rightly or wrongly, and who the hell am I to say, when you say you're being racist, it's not so much you're being racist, you're really saying you are racist, and that's much more complicated. If you tell me, look, James, you're being racist, I'm going to say, let's have a conversation so I understand what the hell did I just say, and how did that offend you, so I can unpack and say, what did I mean by that? Oh, okay, great. I have to fix that. I have to change that. But if you say, James, you're racist, the conversation just kind of stops, right? I don't want to engage with you because it feels like you're just calling me out to score a point, it just feels very weird, and it's very hard to separate the concept of being and doing. Yep.
And it's a lot of times making sure you're following up with, let me help you unpack that.
Yeah.
And I think I've had a lot of these conversations with coronavirus being, obviously the number one topic on every news site. And wild. There's been just a ton of xenophobia and it's not even, I don't think most of the time it's purposeful because people don't understand why it's wrong to be like, well, this is, a Chinese virus. And so it is completely, I think it's a good thing to have people who you trust enough to help you call that stuff out. Yeah. Otherwise, you're going to say it to the wrong person and things will blow up. And so I think we all have to be open to that kind of feedback. And I mean, that's just in a workplace in general. We should all be prepared to get feedback that like something we did was wrong. Because in all situations, we should want to fail fast. This is definitely also one of the situations where you want to fail fast. And that's as, an individual contributor, I want to know if I'm offending people. But as a manager, you need to be like in tune with like habits that are going on your team, because like one bad person will like ruin everyone.
Yeah, because they say it's okay if you call it out that way, or if one person calls it the Chinese virus, what you're saying is the whole team is, we're totally cool if they say that, and that means everybody should say that, which then spoils the whole barrel, as it were. So interesting. So then, getting back to employer brand more directly. Yes, you want to be authentic. Yes, you want to show your real self. Yes, you want to avoid stock photo black girl. I love that language. And by the way, that I played bass in stock photo black girl, and we didn't do very well. Right. So let's get back to the employer brand part. So if I'm trying to hire people and I'm trying to tell people what it's really like to be here, and we might have the opportunity to say, and by the way, we would love for someone to be the first blank, for the first Asian, the first Black African American, the first, queer, what have you, to say, look, we're trying to get in this space, but we want to do that. The argument against that, as always, why are you focusing on bringing these audiences in instead of saying they should all, quote unquote, compete at equal levels, versus being intentional and saying, look, we'd like to open these doors up to people who are not white dudes or not white women. How do you talk about that relative to the employer brand?
Yes. And so a lot of times you will get people who will say, there aren't great women engineers. I can't find them.
Oh my God.
You're not looking hard enough. And so a lot of times people are like, well, I just want to hire the best talent. And I can tell you that there is best talent in every single marginalized group.
Yeah.
People just do not want to do the work. And I think that is, you're still competing. You're not just you're not hiring someone because they're Black. That's not a thing. I would be horribly offended if you were like, you're not that good at your job, but you were brown, so we're going to hire you.
That sounds fair. It sounds like something you should be offended by, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's what I think you have to explain to people, is we're not just looking for people who are Black or queer. Yeah. We are looking for best-in-class talent from whoever who has different perspectives than the people we already have.
And all those fun transition words. If I'm a white dude, and I've mostly hired white dudes, I have a yardstick by which I measure a developer, a nurse, a whatever. It's going to be a very lily white yardstick, right? Because I'm functionally measuring myself and everybody I've found. If it turns out that someone of a different gender, of a different ethnicity, or what have you, they do it a little differently. How do I measure, how do I bring them in and justify them if I have a different yardstick? If they code just as well, but they do it from a different direction, or they come at it differently, but because I'm using this kind of yardstick, what's the line to if this, oh gosh, I'm going to butcher this. If intelligence is the ability to climb a tree, a fish is an idiot, right? If that's your metric and that's the only yardstick you use, how do you kind of open it up so that other forms of intelligence, other forms of skill, other forms of experience and strategy can apply to this idea without limiting your way of looking at them?
Of course. And I think, again, that goes back to being able to be really, really self-aware within yourself and being able to say, well, if they do it this way, are they doing it wrong, or are they just doing it differently? Yeah. And so obviously there are roles that, like engineering, for example, they've got to be able to code. Like, they're not going to hire me to code. It's not going to happen because I might do it differently, and that different is very wrong. But I do think there is a way that you can say to yourself, like, I do it I do it in, column A. And engineer comes in and they do it column B, but we all get the same answers, and being able to be okay with that. And I don't think that's necessarily a matter of D&I, but that's a matter of managerial skills.
Yeah. Okay.
Because a lot of times we don't, when we're new to being a manager when we're just kind of micromanaging. It is hard to manage or micromanage someone who thinks differently than you, because you want to be able to keep them so in line. And I think self-awareness is something that is really key in being a manager, number one, but being an ally in the D&I space, because there are always going to be things that pop up in your brain that you're like, why did I think that?
Yeah.
Like a perfect example is when someone interviews someone like me and they say, oh my goodness, I'm so surprised by how articulate you are.
Oh.
And then I want you to like step back and be like, oh God, why did I say that?
Yeah.
Because
yeah.
like, would
yeah.
you say that to like a white dude? Like, oh my
Yeah.
God, I'm so surprised that you can talk. Wow. And so constantly, and like, again, there's always going to be mistakes. You're going to say things that afterwards you're like, whoa, why did I say that? But having the ability to say, why did I say that? Why do I feel this way? I think transcends into that same topic, is why do I feel like, because this person is doing it differently but still gets the same answer, why do I feel like that's wrong?
Yeah.
Is it because I'm scared to manage them? Is it because I'm scared they will do it better than myself? So I think, it's really more about being self-aware, but also making sure that you have a very balanced interview team, because there is always going to be difference of opinion on an interview team. And that's why I encourage people to not do it like, I interviewed them, so I'm going to hire them method, which is still a thing. But
Yep. No, I know. When I did it, I used to do it, and I was surprised by a certain kind of person tended to hire, and I never really thought of it that way, and I tended to hire a certain kind of person. It took a while for me to kind of realize I need to open this up to other points of view, because I am hiring a certain kind of person over and over and over again, and that's not fair. That's not right. So I'm calling myself out. But that was a couple years ago, so hopefully I've gotten a little better since then.
it's good to call yourself out, though. I think, a lot of times people ask me, like, what is the best way for me to be an ally? And I think the number one way is, like, being able to call yourself out on your own BS. Because if you can't call it out on yourself, then like you don't get to call it out on anyone else.
And no one else gets to call it out on you, because you get
Exactly.
defensive and you're a jerk and you're going to push back on it, and there's repercussions and all that stuff.
Yep. And then it's just like this cycle of denial and being defensive.
Yeah. Well, then you don't have a D&I team, because you don't need one. Because
Yep. We don't talk about it because we don't have a problem.
obviously. Okay. One more question there. So when I think about employer brand, it's a big, complicated subject for me, which is why I love it. It's incredibly challenging and open, and there's a whole lot of ways to approach it and think about it and do it. But one of the things most employer branders are charged with is expanding the pipeline, right? We want more applicants in a time when maybe up until, let's say, 3 weeks ago, it was incredibly hard to find talent. It was incredibly hard to get people to apply. Yes, there's suddenly 10 million people looking for jobs, but they may not be in the skill sets that you want. So your job is to get enough of the right kind of talent to show up. So when I think of D&I, I always think about it as terms of not about how do I reach these poor, marginalized human beings who look differently and sound differently from me. I think of it as the talent's out there. How do I get them over to me? If I speak white to a black person, will a black person show up to my white job, to my white language, to my just internalized conversation, even if it's not, intentional in any way, shape, or form? The data that shows Sephora has 70% female developers, and people are shocked by it. I said, why? It's a company about women, for women, of women. Not surprisingly, they speak as women do, and thus they attract more women. So, and that's a win, and that shows you that the talent is everywhere. So how do you open the door to more and more of people who are not like you? If you're writing the job post, if you're writing the ad, if you're writing the career site, what are some thoughts or some ideas or some tricks to kind of say, how do you make sure that it doesn't just sound like you, so that you can really attract people who don't in any way, shape, or form look or act like you do?
Yeah, two things. I think there needs to be kind of like a checks and balances when it comes to the wording of job descriptions.
Yeah.
A lot of times you'll see, especially in sales job descriptions, they are super male oriented.
Oh, yeah.
They just like use words that are like
aggressive.
Yeah, like aggressive, competitive, and like
goal oriented.
Yes, and like Justin just like screams fraternity at me. And so I think you have to have a checks and balances system where you have different people read your job descriptions and your career site and say, hey, would you want to apply to this? And that means maybe going not necessarily just to HR anymore, but like go to the people who are actually on that team.
Yeah.
Like read through this and then have someone else who's not on that team read through that. Would this make you want to apply here?
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, people apply, when they look at job descriptions, they look at very briefly at your top paragraph, which is like a blurb about your company. They don't actually care that much about that. But then they immediately scroll down to the qualifications. And if your qualifications sound like it's a dude, I'm not going to apply.
Yeah.
Specifically, if it's like a sales type role, because I also, as a woman, don't want to go onto a sales team where I'm now the only woman, because that's not a good time.
Yeah.
And then again, then they scroll down to the benefits and looking at that. And so when you talk benefits and you're just putting like beer, foosball, happy hours, like I'm also like, there's not like maternity leave, healthcare, 401k. I'm also like concerned that maybe like it's not a super grown up brand either.
Yeah.
And so I think having checks and balances and making sure that you're open to language swaps, but then when you're actually looking for your talent, diversifying where you're actually looking. There are tons of groups on LinkedIn, Facebook. You don't have to just use like Boolean strings all of the time. I know we get like real into Boolean, because I feel very strongly about, there are tons like Hire Tools, Seek Out, they all offer me the opportunity to search based on race. Which like kind of gives me the creeps, because like, again, I don't want you to reach out to me because I'm Black. I want you to reach out to me because I'm a badass. Like that's it. And so there are tons of like Black engineering groups, like Black women in tech. Like there are all of these groups that exist, like Lean In ATX is full of all different types of lean in circles. And so making sure that you're finding a way to get in touch with those people. And maybe it is you reach out to the person who runs their career site or runs their happy hours and say, hey, I'm hiring and I have this role at this company and I think you have people who'd be a great fit. Would you mind pitching this?
I just want to pause right there.
Yeah.
I think I love the way you worded that. It's not, I'm looking for a woman, I'm looking for an African-American, I'm looking for a Latinx. It's, I'm looking for someone who I think you might have people who might be good at that.
Exactly.
I think that's great.
At the end of the day, you're not looking for someone to just tick your box. And if you are, then we're having the wrong conversation. You're looking for someone who is a badass and really good at what they do and who's going to bring new perspectives into your world.
Which is why I always think of it as being underserved, that because you're not reaching out to those communities and you're not telling and explaining to them in a language that is more closely aligned to who they are, it's not so much that you're pandering, it's just that you're not speaking, you're wandering China speaking English and wondering why no one will talk to you. It's like you're talking the wrong language to these people. You got to talk in their language first.
Exactly. I mean, like when you think about engineering, there are very different people who hang out on LinkedIn. And like most of my engineers tell me they don't hang out on LinkedIn. Like if I want to get good engineering talent, like LinkedIn isn't really the place for me to reach out to them because they check their messages every 92 days. Yeah. And so it's the same concept. Like the same people don't just hang out in the same spot.
But recruiters do. So therefore that's what's the line, you know, the oxymoron is the guy lost his keys in the dark and the friend says, you lost them here under the street light? And he goes, no, I lost them over there in the dark, but the light's better over here. And the recruiters are focused on this place where they're so comfortable and they're so used to going and they know all the buttons and they know all the ways of doing it, but not engaging with the fact that, you know, engineers and other data scientists and whatnot, nurses do not live on LinkedIn like recruiters do.
Correct. And I think the other thing is, like, I think there will be a shift at some point in the way the world kind of operates where, like, I think contractors will become a very large portion of this workforce. And guess what? They're not really hanging out on LinkedIn either because they're entrepreneurs. They're, like, building their businesses. And so I think as a recruiter, as someone who's looking for talent, like, in order to be, like, very good at your craft, you have to be able to, like, log off of LinkedIn. Yeah. Like, as of right now, I don't have LinkedIn Recruiter because I have feelings about them. It's like one of those things, like they're necessary evil, so their product is like meh, and they don't ever fix it because they don't have to, because no matter what, people are like, well, I need it. It's like, I have to have it.
Like recruiters don't think they're recruiters unless they have it. Like that's how they define themselves in a lot of ways.
Exactly. And it's like wildly expensive. And there's just all of these other avenues that you can find really great talent that one make you look different and cool. Cause like, oh my God, you reached out to this person on like Amazon cause you saw their review and you were like, oh, you read this engineering book in this language that I'm looking for. And I'm looking for an engineer who's coding in that language. So like, there's tons of ways to find people that don't involve just like looking at their personal networking sites.
Yeah. Interesting. All right. Madison, this has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for being present and being here with me and hanging out and shooting the shit and all that good stuff. I really appreciate your time. I really appreciate your attention. And I imagine anybody who listens to this got a lot of stuff out of it. So thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me and dealing with this Muppety voice that I have in real life. I appreciate that.
I just had a webinar today, so I feel like I'm all, hi, how are you? My voice is fried. Let's talk about you, DNA. So we're a good pair today. Thanks everybody for listening. As always, go ahead and share. Go ahead and tell everybody about it. I've got just so you know, because I didn't do it in housekeeping, I've got an email newsletter, which by now, if you haven't signed up, what are you waiting for? Just links to great stories and better ways of thinking about employer brand to keep you sharp. So go to employerbrand.news for that, or just look in the show notes. Otherwise, I will see you all next week. Thank you again, Madison. So thrilled that you could be here. Thanks everybody for listening. I'll see you later. This has been an episode of the Talent Cast, part of the Evergreen Podcast Network. If you'd like to get in touch with me, a couple of ways to do that. Obviously, there's Twitter at The War for Talent. You can go to the podcast website at thetalentcast.com. If you'd like to stay up to date on the news of this industry and what's going on, just go to employerbrand.news and sign up for the email newsletter with lots of news and links to other places. If you just want to connect with me on LinkedIn and just say hello or let's just talk, that's linkedin.com/in/thewarfortalent, or I bet if you just search for James Ellis, I pop up pretty quick. Otherwise, if you have any questions, concerns, considerations, ideas for podcasts, holler at me, let me know what's going on. Thank you if you've shared it. Please share if you haven't. Rate us, review us. I love all that stuff. It really does help kind of keep the message going and get the message out there. Thanks again, and we'll see you next week.
Do you love news about LinkedIn, Indeed, Google, and just about every other recruitment tech company out there?
Hell yeah. I'm Chad.
I'm Cheese.
We're the Chad and Cheese Podcast.
All the latest recruiting news and insights are on our show.
Dripping in snark and attitude.
Subscribe today wherever you listen to your podcasts.
We out.